About a year ago, I switched to Ableton Live, and I stream myself producing music in Ableton Live. I'm going to show you some clips of that and kind of how I do it. But I'm going to kind of go over a multitude of ways that you could stream yourself producing music in Ableton Live. So check it out. All right, before we get started, there is a link to download the Live Streaming Musician Blueprint in the description of this video. This document has tips and tricks and all sorts of stuff that will help you on your journey as a live streaming musician, some basic settings and stuff like that. So you're definitely going to want to download that and get that for your reference. So go ahead and click the link in the description and download that. All right, into the video. All right, so here I have my Ableton session. There are a few ways that you can go about streaming yourself producing your music in Ableton on something like Twitch or YouTube. The way that I most recommend people do this is either with two computers or with two audio interfaces and a very powerful computer. If you're using a MacBook or a MacBook Pro, that even if it is the fastest one that exists, generally speaking, you're going to have to do a lot of track freezing and minimizing the amount of open audio plugins that you have at one time. Video encoding, like I'm doing here, where I'm capturing the video and putting it into this thing, is very taxing on your processor. So if you don't have a really high-end processor, and laptops don't have desktop grade processors, so if you're using a laptop of any kind, unless it's like a really high-end gaming computer or something like that, the likelihood is that you're using some kind of a mobile variant of a processor. And on top of that, it doesn't have as good of a cooling solution for that processor. So as the processor starts to do a lot of things like video encoding and audio encoding, the processor will get hot and it will actually start to get throttled by your motherboard or your logic board on a Mac to make sure that it doesn't overheat, because the fans can only do so much on a laptop. Now, I have a liquid cooling situation in my desktop computer. I'm actually using a Hackintosh, so I custom built a computer using PC parts, and then I loaded macOS onto it. So I have a unique situation here where I have a very, very powerful processor, an i9-9900K. It's 8 cores, 16 threads, very, very fast. So I can encode video at 60 frames per second and 1080, no problem, while running a full Ableton session, while editing video, while rendering. It's no big deal. But I used to have a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro. And when I had a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro, I had nothing but problems getting my computer to be able to handle all the video encoding and the audio encoding at the same time. So just be aware that if you're using a MacBook Pro of any kind, you're going to have to constantly go into Ableton and right-click and freeze track all the time, just as much as you possibly can, because if you don't, what will end up happening is your OBS, which, let's open up OBS real quick, your OBS situation is going to start dropping frames. So you see this dropped frames situation here? You see how it says 0 on mine, yet I'm streaming in 60 FPS at 6,200 kbps? I'm really cranking out some juice here, and this is, 20% of my CPU. We're just chilling. We're just rocking and rolling. We're chilling, no problem. It's going to be a lot harder for you to do that if you're using a laptop, and especially if you're using a Mac laptop. Just a heads up. Okay, so now that we've gotten into the fact that you likely need two computers, or you need a very, 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 very fast computer, or you need to constantly freeze your tracks to save your CPU from the audio unit usage. Now let's get into actually how to route your audio. So for me, the way that I've done it, my favorite way to do it by far, the number one way that I recommend everybody do it, is just go out and buy an $100 cheapo interface. Doesn't matter what it is. So let's say that you're using an interface that has multiple audio outs, right? So a lot of people are likely using the UAD Quad Twin, right? This is the most likely answer for a lot of people. Let's look at the back of this thing. This thing has your main monitors, right? Left and right out. And it also has line out 3 and 4. Now this is awesome. Technically, what you could do is, if you were only, let's say you were only using this front jack on the front for the guitar, right? That's the only instrument jack you were using. Now, you're going to still have a mic, so really this isn't going to work for you. You need a second one, so scratch that completely. You need a second audio interface. But what you could do is you could take these line out 3 and 4, right? And plug these into just any janky 2-input audio interface, right? Like, we're talking cheapo deluxe, whatever. Here we go. A Scarlett 2i, $150. Great. Right here. Right? So what you would do is you would take the outs 3 and 4 on this thing, okay? And you would plug them into the ins of this thing. And what's cool is inside of OBS, what you can do is you can actually add, click the plus button right here. You can add a audio input capture. And now we could call this like janky interface, right? Just whatever our little janky interface we bought. If we bought that Scarlett or Scarlett 2i or some M Audio, it doesn't matter. Some cheapo deluxe $50 to $150 interface just for those two inputs. Hit enter. Then we could go in here and find it. So whatever it was actually called. Now I have a Complete Audio 6. That's my main interface. And obviously here's a bunch of other stuff, right? But you could quite literally just, if you had that, let's say this said, you know, whatever that Scarlett 2i interface, you could click that. And then now you could set inputs or outputs 3 and 4 to go out of your audio interface if you had something like a quad or a twin or something like a UAD interface. And then those, you could get, you know, just some quick 1/4-inch cables. And then those go from those outputs into the inputs of the Scarlett. And then boom, you're done. Then you have to freeze tracks, make sure you're not overdoing your processing power on your computer while you're doing your video encoding. And we can go over some settings to make sure that's a little easier for you. But that's the way I recommend it 100% of the time. Get 2 interfaces. It's going to be the easiest one by far. When you start using software, it gets a little funky. We can go over some software stuff, but that's how you do that. Now, inside of Ableton, let's say you do what I just recommended, which is what I recommend. Okay, cut in here real quick. I messed something up. You need to click on Master. Down here, bottom right, click on your actual master channel before you do what I'm about to do, because we're applying this to the master channel. So just click on master. Now we can do what we're going to do. What I would do is on your master track, so you're going to, you know, go here and you're going to go to audio effect track. Okay. We're going to build a new audio effect track. And then we're going to, let's drag a utility. Okay. And then we're going to drag an external audio effect. This is what you're going to build. Okay. So now let's go here. Let's create another chain. So this one we're going to call 1 and 2, because these are going to be, or you could just call this like your monitors, your studio monitors, right? And this one we can just call OBS, right? Ooh, OBS. Perfection. And now, same thing, we're going to need an external audio effect and utility. Great. So now what you can do is your monitors, we're going to route the audio to, my studio monitors are plugged into the outputs of my interface on 1 and 2. I know that. You're going to have to find out what those are and what your stuff is plugged into, but it's probably outputs 1 and 2. So no input. Perfect. Now when I play this, we should start seeing audio levels coming here. Perfect. We should see audio levels coming here. Now, what's going to end up happening is this is going to be way too loud. Most likely, this is going to be way too loud. So this is why we put the utility in front. I'm just going to drag this gain down, probably to like, I don't know, -10 or something. Let's play now. Check this peak again. Right? Cool. Still getting a little spicy. So I can pull that down even more. Okay, so that's what's going to be coming out of my studio monitors. Now I use headphones, as you should when you're streaming, because you don't want the sound coming out of your speakers and into this microphone. Bad idea. It just doesn't sound good for the person listening. And we want to have the highest quality stream we can. So this is great. This is ready to rock and roll. Now OBS, again, we're going to go audio to outputs 3 and 4, as I was describing. If you're using any audio interface that has more than 2 outputs, so if it has outputs 1 and 2, mains for monitors, and 3 and 4, which you can use for anything else, we're going to use that 3 and 4 here. Click 3 and 4, and as you see again, it's way too loud. So let's pull this back down to -12. We'll hit play. And now what's happening is, you can see here, we're getting audio out of both outputs 1 and 2 and outputs 3 and 4. Now, if I had outputs 3 and 4 going into another interface, inside OBS, that janky interface or whatever that we added, we would be able to start seeing audio coming through there at this moment, because now we have essentially split our audio through these external audio effect racks, external audio effects, and the audio effect rack, right? So we made these two distinct audio channels that we're now piping audio through. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that you can do is you can use a few different things. You can use this thing called LoopBack. LoopBack is a $100 software. It says free to download, but it's a trial, so just be aware that it's $100. So, and then you can do essentially what I just described. You can create these different audio sources, whether it's through Ableton or whatever, and then you can start to route them to certain output channels. And then inside of OBS, for example, you could then create a new audio input capture, and you could call this LoopBack, right? And then in here, you could select LoopBack. Now, I don't use LoopBack, and in fact, on my Hackintosh, for some reason, LoopBack hates me, so I'm just not going to use it. But I've used it on regular Macs. It works great. So if you want to do a software option and you don't want two separate audio interfaces, that's fine. You can use something called LoopBack. It's $100. Now, there are free things that you can use too. There's a thing called SoundFlower, right? SoundFlower. Same people that actually make the LoopBack make this free plugin called SoundFlower. Now, I've used SoundFlower in the past. The problem with SoundFlower is sometimes, and I don't know why, it's either core audio drivers, something's weird, but SoundFlower can start making pops and clicks. And I don't know if it has to do with OBS taking CPU priority over core audio because it's doing audio and video encoding to push out to the stream. I have no idea. I've definitely had my fair share of issues with SoundFlower, and LoopBack is built on SoundFlower. So, something to keep in mind if you're going to use a software option. A free version is called SoundFlower. You can download it. Just Google SoundFlower download. You can also download this thing called iShowU Audio Capture. And this thing is another thing you can use. iShowU Audio Capture. iShowU, Audio Capture. This is essentially the same thing. And what it would do is it will show up, if you go to like System Preferences, in your sound, you would see it in here. It would say iShowU audio, and it would essentially be as if you could select it as an audio interface, as a set of speakers, as a way to push audio out. When you install either iShowU Audio Capture or the SoundFlower plugin, it would show up in your list. Like you could, you could option click your speaker up here, right? And see all of your stuff. So just like LoopBack here. LoopBack isn't actually a real audio interface. It's not a real set of speakers. Nothing's actually plugged in. It's just software. But you could select it to push audio out. Now this brings us to making a multi-output or an aggregate audio, like an audio aggregate device. So you need to go to Audio Midi Setup. So just Spotlight Audio Midi Setup. This is a really good tool. So what you can do here is, let's just say we wanted to make an aggregate device. Aggregate devices allow us to take multiple audio interfaces or multiple pieces of software like LoopBack or SoundFlower or iShowU Audio Capture and turn them into one selectable audio interface that you could use in something like Ableton. So let's do an aggregate device, for example. Now we can select what we want. So let's say I want the Complete Audio 6 and I wanted LoopBack, right? Now you can see LoopBack has essentially these two input and two output channels. Just because it's software, it does all the routing internally. I just heard some crazy sound. It does all the routing internally. So what this allows me to do is select and unselect different things. I can essentially now, this aggregate device, let's go ahead and name it Complete and LoopBack, and you'll see what we're doing here. Oh, that's LoopBack. Right? You'll see, this is here. Now, let's go into Ableton really quickly. Let's go into the preferences. And I can select, I might need to reboot Ableton. So let's do that real quick. Let's quit. Let's not save that. I just had some of my studio lights burn out. That was pretty interesting. Yikes. Okay, well, now I know what the sound was. Okay, so now Ableton's back open. We can go to Preferences, and you can see we can now select this Complete and LoopBack, 8 ins, 8 outs, right? And this will allow us to use both of those audio interfaces. Now, this could be multiple audio interfaces. Going back to the Audio Midi setup, let's say I had multiple actual audio interfaces, that Scarlett plus the Twin, the UAD plus maybe this Complete. I would be able to select those from this list. And then inside Ableton here, you can go to input config and make sure that, you know, all your mono inputs are on, stereo inputs are on, right? Like let's just say we selected the Complete and the LoopBack. Here's all the stereo ins and stereo outs. We'd have to like turn these on depending on which ones we wanted. Same thing with the outputs, right? And then that would allow us ultimately, let's go back to Complete, to go through, and if we ever wanted to use multiple channels, so I have like a 18 channel audio interface that I use sometimes whenever I'm doing live drum streams, and I can merge my Complete and that XR18 into one aggregate device inside Audio Midi setup. And then whenever I use that device in Ableton, when I select, you know, I call it Ableton Room, I would then be able to select all of those. Let's, you know, let's say stereo inputs 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and then mono inputs 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to, you know, 22 or whatever it would be, right? All those inputs would be here, and I'd be able to use those, and I wouldn't have to sacrifice using one or the other. I could use both interfaces at the same time. That's one of the beautiful things about Core Audio on Mac, is you can create these either multi-output devices, which just allow you to use multiple outputs under one device. You could set, you know, your headphone jack and your audio interface. If you wanted both, you could create a multi-output device. Click here, click multi-output device, and then you could do the built-in output, the built-in line output, right? You could create all these different, you could essentially build a multiple out pathway that you could then rename and call, you know, test out, and then go up here, and here's test out, right? And then you could use all of those outputs under one set of speakers, or, you know, one audio channel, or whatever you want to call, using one audio device would then be able to pipe out multiple outputs. But the aggregate devices are cool because you get to use the inputs and the outputs, and then in something like Ableton, you get to select all of those inputs and outputs and do that whole situation, which is really cool. All right, that was really long-winded. That's essentially it. So now, again, this audio, external audio effect, you'll end up using, even if you use LoopBack, you're probably still going to want to, again, let's say you use something like LoopBack, or you use SoundFlower or iShowU audio capture, doesn't really matter. You're still going to want to create an aggregate device and then go through here and select, you know, LoopBack and Complete. And then whenever you go into Ableton, you'll want to use that new aggregate device that you just created, called Complete and LoopBack, or whatever you call it. And then these, this would be still your studio monitors, right? So this master channel would still be studio monitors, right? And this would still be to OBS. And so studio monitors would still be whatever the plugs are in the back of the audio interface that go to your speakers. And then this OBS may be, you know, to whatever LoopBack is, right? And then you'd have to test using LoopBack software or whatever, and figure out which of these options pipe audio through LoopBack. And then from LoopBack, you could then again add it as inside OBS, an audio input capture or output capture even. But one of these you would need to test to see which thing you would use if you're using something like LoopBack. This goes back to what I said at the very beginning, which is I recommend just spending $100 and getting a janky interface. If you have 4 outputs on your main interface, and just plugging those 3 and 4 plugs into the 1 and 2 inputs on that other interface, you know, balancing the levels, and you're ready to rock and roll. It's the easiest, best way to do it by far. Also, if you're using software like LoopBack and other stuff, and you're encoding video using OBS or something like that, there's a high likelihood you could get some latency in your audio, because ultimately you're going to end up using a lot of CPU to encode video, like I'm doing right now, and like you will be doing when you're streaming your situation. And that whole tax on your processor can interfere with audio processing and the amount of time it takes for audio to route through your whole software configuration and then into OBS, and you'll start having like latency issues, and you play your guitar and then 2 seconds later your guitar sound actually comes through, right? So you really want to avoid that if at all possible. So So for capturing your video, you click plus, you do display capture, right? And then you just choose the one that you're using. So I'm using display number 0. I have multiple displays. This is my main display that you're seeing here. And you can choose to show the cursor. I recommend doing that if you're streaming yourself, because then people can see where your mouse is on the stream. And then try not to crop it unless you want to crop off like this top bar, or you have something sensitive that you don't want on the screen. You can always do that, but I just recommend trying to hide things from your screen versus using software to crop it. And that's about it. As far as Ableton, I would just recommend that you use a hardware interface if you can. You have to use a fast computer, otherwise you're going to freeze tracks and have that kind of issue. If you need to use 2 computers, that's a whole nother thing where you're going to need to essentially get a capture card, right? So you'll need to get like something like a Camlink, like an Elgato Camlink. And this Camlink is a USB to HDMI. And so USB to HDMI, and you'll be able to take this HDMI and plug it into the side of your other computer and essentially capture. This would go into your second computer. This would be where OBS would be running, is where this USB plugs in, and then this HDMI would then plug into the side of your MacBook or something and act as a second monitor, and it would capture that monitor, pipe it into your second computer where you're doing the video encoding for OBS. So you either need to have a really fast computer or 2 computers. If you're using a base MacBook Pro or even like a pretty decent MacBook Pro, you're just going to be fighting your processor. And I know because I did it for years. But you do you, and hopefully this video was helpful. If you have any questions whatsoever, please leave them in the chat underneath the comment section. Click the links if anything pops out at you. If you want to check out some of the stuff, I'll leave some links to some of these things that I mentioned in here, so you can just go really quickly check all that out. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.